Another was an incentive for banks to restructure loans. By incentives, I mean incentives that we give from a regulatory perspective and the classification and the provisioning that would have to happen. Another scheme, another first, was the Rozgar scheme. The Rozgar scheme, or the payroll financing scheme, was something never tried before. And it was a scheme designed specifically to protect jobs, where the state bank lent to commercial banks and asked them to on-lend to those customers who committed to those banks that they would only lend if the customer committed to not laying off any workers in 6 months. And I just want to point out also that when we rolled out these schemes, what is particularly rewarding is to see that the distribution of the benefits reached both the small, the medium players, as well as some of the larger players as well. And I want to illustrate that. In the scheme for the payroll financing, 238 billion rupees were disbursed by banks. And out of these 238 billion rupees, there were about 2,700 businesses that received this finance. Out of those 2,700 businesses, 2,000 of those were either SMEs or small corporates, and by small corporates I mean corporates with a turnover of less than 2 billion rupees. So that scheme not only saved jobs, but I'm happy that in its distribution it also was fairly evenly distributed. Another first was a scheme called TERF, the Temporary Economic Refinance Facility. This is a scheme under which 435 billion rupees were approved, and to date, about 215 billion rupees have been disbursed. This was a scheme that was also, while it was developed at the State Bank of Pakistan, very much benefited from input from banks. And I remember at that point we had very, very frequent interactions with the bank presidents, and some of the refinements and improvements that came in the scheme came from suggestions from the bank presidents, from their conversations with their own clients, such as extending the scheme to balancing and to modernization, as well as for new projects, how it was conceived originally. In this scheme, about 50% of the beneficiaries of TERF were beneficiaries with loans amount of 500 million or less. In other words, I wanted to point out that in the distribution of TERF as well, there were a number of beneficiaries that also were medium-sized players. Another key point I want to make is that many times it is said that the benefits of certain schemes that either the State Bank or the Government of Pakistan comes out with are limited to certain sectors, and often textile sectors is mentioned one that gets a lot of the benefits. Well, in this scheme of TERF, about 40% went to that sector, but the majority went to all the other sectors in Pakistan, most of which were domestic-oriented sectors. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you look back, these were some of the measures that were taken by banks, supported and guided by the State Bank of Pakistan. And I think it should give you all a lot of sense of pride that were it not for your hard work, we would not have grown at the estimated 4% last year, and we would not be growing at a rate that the State Bank thinks will end close to 5% for this fiscal year. So thank you for all your hard work in this last year. But let me also mention some of the other new initiatives that have been undertaken by banks. Again, a first for Pakistan. And Salim Raza Saab spoke very eloquently about the fact that banks primarily have been lending to the government. And I want to point out some new and very, very significant things that have happened. That quite honestly, I think if you were talking about it 2 years ago, you would not have anticipated that they would happen in the banking sector of Pakistan. The first is the housing and the construction sector. You know, if you were to speak 2 years ago and I was to tell you that this is what would be some of the accomplishments of the banking sector, I think most of you would not have believed that that would be possible. The State Bank of Pakistan, supporting the vision of the Government of Pakistan, started off with a comprehensive program to encourage lending to the housing and construction sector, number one. But number two, to particularly encourage lending to those sections of our society that can only afford low-cost housing. To get mortgages in Pakistan is a feat by itself, but to try to get mortgages to those whose capacity is just to buy a 5-marla or a 10-marla house, that was, if I had told you 2 years ago that something like that would have been happening, I think you would have been hard-pressed to believe. But today, when I look at some of the numbers, and I see that housing and construction credit from banks has reached 305 billion rupees by end of September 2021, compared to 166 billion rupees at end September 2020, that's nearly doubling. That's quite an accomplishment. And I want to congratulate all of you. I want to congratulate the bankers who've been working in this area. Then, if you look at the low-cost housing segment and the amount of mortgages that have been given for low-cost housing, it used to be zero. In fact, nobody could even think of going to a bank and applying for a low-cost housing mortgage. Today, I'm happy to say that because of all of your efforts, more than 200 billion rupees worth of applications have been submitted to banks for low-cost housing. 208 billion rupees worth of applications are now with all of you. And out of that, 80 billion rupees have been approved. 80 billion rupees of low-cost housing mortgages for small houses have been approved by banks, which is a number that comes to 23,000 people to date already have approvals for mortgages for low-cost housing. Out of this, about 19 billion has already been disbursed. And as we have mentioned recently, while we recognize there is a lot of process that has to happen between a loan approval and disbursement, it's an area where more efforts to disburse would help more of our fellow citizens realize their dream of home ownership. So housing and construction was another new initiative that has happened in the last 1 year when I was here last, in which the numbers are in front of you, in the tens and hundreds of billions of rupees. Another such initiative where the results are in the billions of dollars is an initiative to digitally onboard the Pakistani diaspora. Another first for our country, and another initiative that would not have been possible were it not for the partnership with the banks. And I'm referring to Roshan Digital Accounts, the initiative of the State Bank of Pakistan to make it possible that overseas Pakistanis, no matter where they may be in the world, can digitally and online open an account in one of the participating banks in Pakistan. It gives me great pleasure to know that due to the hard work of all the banks in this area, the participating banks, to date we have received about $2.7 billion in Roshan Digital accounts. We have about 270,000 accounts open, and every day between tonight and tomorrow morning, 1,000 new accounts would be opened from overseas Pakistanis all over the world. People often talk about the fact that the money that overseas Pakistanis are sending in these accounts is one of the key benefits. To me, over and above that, the fact that there is a permanent connection being created between each overseas Pakistani and Pakistan through a bank account, I think is something that is going to give dividends not just in the short term, but for years to come. And we should not underestimate the impact that that would have on our economy. Another first that has happened, ladies and gentlemen, and all the bankers here, is an area where Pakistan particularly lagged, and an area which becomes apparent even when I look around the auditorium right now, is how well our banking system has served women. And we stand out, unfortunately, amongst our peer group of countries as a country where the gender gap in financial inclusion is painfully large. And it's so even when we compare ourselves to Iran, to Saudi Arabia, to Malaysia, to Turkey, to countries that we consider similar to ourselves. And it's an area where we must resolve that we have to do something. And I am delighted that again banks have partnered with the State Bank of Pakistan in the newly released Banking on Equality policy. And to the organizers of these awards, I would make a request. Since we have launched this strategy, Banking on Equality, and since I am sure all of you would agree that the importance of reducing the gender gap in financial inclusion is tremendous, let me make a request that in next year's award, you consider an award for the bank that has made the most progress in reducing the gender gap in financial inclusion. Another first between last year and this year's awards is something that used to be said cannot happen in Pakistan, and that is lending without collateral, particularly for SMEs. One of the key reasons why SMEs in Pakistan do not get much credit is the whole business of lending based upon collateral. So as you all must be aware, the State Bank of Pakistan launched a scheme called Saaf Asan Finance, Saaf from the word that is clean lending, lending without collateral. And to me, it's an extremely exciting new scheme offered to promote inclusion and access to credit for SMEs. As some of you may know, there are some distinctive features of this scheme. First and foremost, it is a way to bank and a way for the state bank to work with commercial banks, where we have tried to make it in the interest of the banks. In housing, in some of the other areas, the way we have worked is through targets. And in this case, we wanted to try something new in the spirit of continued innovation from the state bank. And that was to come up with a way that we make it in the interest of banks to want to lend to SMEs, to want to participate and partner with the state bank. So we came up with a vision that we would develop a program where we would ask banks to bid for it. It would not be mandatory on all banks. We would invite banks to ask them, are you interested in partnering with it? And what we thought was we would make it very attractive for the beginning, in the first 3 years, so that banks develop the infrastructure for SME lending. And if banks decide to do so, and I'll tell you the response to this in a minute, if banks decide to do so, then this will be sustainable. In other words, it would last well beyond the 3 years introductory period where we are giving incentives. State Bank is giving a significant incentive that we lend to these banks at 1%, and they can keep a spread of at most 8%, so that the end user rate for an SME would at most be 9%. And remember, these are those SMEs that are not in the formal sector right now, so they are probably paying informally probably 2 to 3% per month. And instead, they would be able to get borrowing maximum at an end user rate of 9%. The government of Pakistan is giving a guarantee ranging between 40 to 60%, and that too on a first loss basis. So our thinking was, in the first 3 years, to give an attractive incentive and let the banks bid for it. Don't make it mandatory. I'm very, very happy to share that we had said that we would award this to 8 banks, and we got 22 banks interested in this. 22 banks expressed their proposals to partner with us in the Saaf Asan Finance scheme, and we were very happy to be able to select, and we have already awarded the limits to those banks, and that scheme has now become operational. And I'm also very excited to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that for 2 of these banks, and for a first, fintechs have partnered with the banks to promote lending to SMEs. Now, finally, I do want to mention climate change as well as another area that the State Bank of Pakistan is pushing. We have, as you know, rolled out the guidelines on green banking, It's an area where you will see continued work from our end. And I also want to remind everybody that one of our most successful refinance schemes has been the solar financing scheme that is helping to promote clean energy in Pakistan. So ladies and gentlemen, that was a somewhat long, but I feel necessary trip down the journey that has taken place in the last 1 year. And my goal was to remind all of you, all the bankers, of what you are accomplishing in Pakistan that I believe is going to change our economic future going forward. I had wanted to next talk about what I see some of the challenges. I think Salim Raza Saab has covered them very well. But I want to just mention how the State Bank looks at some of the key challenges. Pakistan is a country that still is relatively underbanked. We have only about 80 million or so unique bank accounts in a country of 220 million. So, by any metric, we are underbanked. Pakistan is also a country which is very underleveraged. If you look at private credit to GDP, at around 20-25% of GDP, it is one of the lowest in the region. So to us, this is a key objective, key goal for the banking industry of Pakistan. And some of the initiatives that we have are going to focus on technology to bring about further improvement in these areas. These are going to focus on digitization, but I do want to mention two specific things for the information of everybody. One is digital banking. We have a draft, a consultation draft on our website. We have gotten lots of very good feedback, and very soon we are going to announce the finalized form of the digital banking framework for Pakistan, and we are hoping that that framework and digital banks in Pakistan is going to be one way in which underbanked Pakistan and underleveraged Pakistan will be addressed. Another conversation that we are having is on open banking. Open banking refers to the fact that data that banks have is something that can be used and shared under appropriate terms with non-banks as well as other entities. And it is a conversation that we are having with the goal of promoting inclusion in Pakistan, with the goal that Pakistan can become better banked and that Pakistan can get to see more leverage, and also that we get to see more competition for some of the areas in which we are lagging when compared to other countries. I won't spend more time on some of the challenges for the banking industry, but our vision is through digitization and through some other means to get us to show improvement on how well Pakistanis are banked and also how much credit and other financial services are provided to Pakistanis. I'll just leave you with one statistic in this, which is that when I mentioned there are about 80 million unique bank accounts, there are 186 million mobile phone subscribers in Pakistan. And you can already see, even if some of these lines, there are multiple lines for one customer, you already see that there is a huge opportunity simply in terms of mobile means of payment and to get people to get banks, to get banking on their phones. The recent initiative that we have launched for digital onboarding of customers, we hope will go a considerable way towards increasing the number of people that have a bank account in their phone or means of doing banking through their phone. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to end with the State Bank's views on the outlook for the economy. And I want to mention 3 points. The first point that I want to mention is that today where we stand from our perspective, I think is a comfortable perspective. It's a perspective where in many areas Pakistan has in fact reduced the vulnerabilities. And to illustrate this point, ladies and gentlemen, I actually want to remind you what the IMF thought Pakistan would be doing when it started its most recent lending program. And I want to share some numbers in terms of what was projected and where we stand today. And I'm referring to back in June of 2019, when the IMF started the program with Pakistan. And in that staff report that is available on the website, IMF also projected what it thought would be some of the key indicators over the next 2 years. So first, in terms of growth, for the fiscal year that has closed in July, the fiscal year 21, IMF projected that our growth would be 3%. Instead, the economy of Pakistan grew nearly 4% in the fiscal year that closed 21. For the current account deficit, the IMF projected we'd have a deficit of 1.7% of GDP for fiscal year 21. We had a current account deficit of 0.6% of GDP. For workers' remittances, the IMF projected a number of around $23 billion. We closed the year with 29 billion in remittances. For the reserves of the State Bank of Pakistan, the IMF projected we would have 14.5 billion reserves. We closed last fiscal year at $17.4 billion. For external debt in percent of GDP, the IMF had projected that debt would be around 32% of GDP. Instead, our external debt to GDP was about 28.5% of GDP. So my point, ladies and gentlemen, when we think in terms of the outlook for the economy, is number one, that we are in a place today where we have reduced many vulnerabilities that we faced about 2 years ago. And my point of sharing these numbers with you was simply to share with you numbers that were done by an independent international institution about how it saw Pakistan progressing. I also want to talk about the fact that today we have a very, very welcome challenge, and that is a challenge of growth. And it is a challenge that we have been wanting to have, because for the past 2 years, growth had actually been slowing, and in fact became negative during COVID. So the fact that we grew 4% last year, and the fact that we are expected to grow close to 5% this year, is a welcome challenge for us to have. And then this brings me to the last point on the outlook for the economy, which is something that commentators often talk about, which is whether this growth would be sustainable. And I wanted to point out that at the State Bank of Pakistan, it is our job to continue to look for risks. And we are determined to take any and all measures that we think are necessary to ensure that growth remains sustainable. In COVID, it was the State Bank of Pakistan, working in partnership with the government, with the banks, that came up with all the measures to ensure that our economy does not get affected too much from COVID. Similarly, we are equally determined that today, when we are addressing or facing this welcome challenge of growth, that we do our very best to ensure that it is a sustainable phase of growth. The number one area that people often tend to get concerned about is, will growth compromise our external position? That is the number one area that people often get concerned about. And in this regard, I wanted to mention some of the concrete steps that are being undertaken. First, as the government of Pakistan and the Advisor Finance has said clearly that we are very soon about to announce the agreement with the IMF for the next review. The bigger point in this that I would like you to take is the determination expressed by the government of Pakistan that we see the journey ahead in partnership with the IMF. And it's not just the money that the IMF brings. It is also the fact that we have confidence in the direction of our policies. And therefore, we are very happy that an independent international institution gives to to the rest of the world as well as to you its assessment of the outlook for the economy. So that's point number one. Point number two is our continued partnership with many of the friendly countries that have supported Pakistan in the past. And I want to remind you of the support that Pakistan has recently been announced by the Saudi government. After the visit of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, you saw the announcement of the deposit for the State Bank of Pakistan as well as the financing for the oil facility. These are measures that over and above the IMF engagement are going to further support our external development. And finally, let me mention two other factors. One is public debt. Public debt to GDP is something that rose very dramatically for a number of countries in COVID. And for Pakistan, in sharp contrast to all the other countries that the IMF has lent to, and in sharp contrast to the average for emerging markets and to the average for advanced economies, that actually fell. In addition, when you talk about external debt or the outlook for the external position, I also want to remind the audience that another factor that we have that is supporting and ensuring that our phase of growth will be sustainable is our market-based exchange rate system. As you know, this was introduced in June of 2019, and since its introduction, it has played a very helpful role of a shock absorber, and a system that by its very nature works to ensure that if there is a weakening in the current account deficit, as we have experienced recently and are experienced currently, this shock absorber works to ensure that the current account deficit does not grow as it would if the exchange rate were not responding. I want to point out that this is an asset for the country because unlike in previous episodes when the current account deficit was weakening, a market-based exchange rate, and one which has demonstrated that it shows orderly two-way movement, is one which will help to ensure that the external position remains sustainable, and therefore the period of growth that we are experiencing remains sustainable. A market-based exchange rate system, as you all know, is a system which is affected by forces of demand and supply for foreign exchange in our market. The demand for foreign exchange is principally affected by imports, and as our economy is growing, that demand for imports is growing. On top of that, we've had the unfortunate timing that commodity prices have risen very, very sharply. And so not only are our quantities of imports growing, but also the price of many of the commodities that we import, for instance oil, has risen very sharply. What the State Bank has been doing to ensure orderly conditions in the foreign exchange market is measures to increase the supply of foreign exchange. And these measures are designed so that while there may be some forces that increase the demand, there are others that increase the supply. Because in a market-based exchange rate system, it is the market that is going to determine. But if we work on the factors underlying demand and supply, that will help with the developments in the market. What are some of these measures? One is something that I mentioned to you earlier. The concessionary finance schemes that the State Bank gives to exporters in particular, LTFF, and also a lot of TERF, has gone towards capacity expansion of exporters. And as this capacity comes online, we hope to see that our export earnings are going to increase significantly greater than they have in the past. Greater export earnings means greater supply of foreign exchange in the market, and therefore helps to meet the greater demand for foreign exchange, and therefore helps to ease the pressures on the exchange. Another area where the State Bank has pushed is remittances from overseas Pakistanis. The figure of about $29 billion in last fiscal year, which was a growth of 27%, is unprecedented in our history. Never have we witnessed 27% growth in remittances. That initiative, or that work, is also geared towards increasing the supply of foreign exchange and thereby addressing the pressures on the exchange rate. Similarly, Roshan Digital Accounts, the initiative launched by the State Bank, in which already $2.7 billion have come in, again is an initiative to increase the supply of foreign exchange into the foreign exchange market and thereby to reduce the pressure on the rupee. So I had wanted to mention that the exchange rate is, the market-based exchange rate system is one that is going to help ensure that we have our external position that remains sustainable. And I wanted to also, since you're all bankers, ask you that when you have conversations about the exchange rate, to also help people have a discussion that is based upon facts and the underlying factors. And I also wanted to perhaps end with a statistic that may surprise some of you. Because in the daily discussions, we are so captivated by what the exchange rate may be on any given day and what it may be compared to the strongest that it has been or to the weakest that it has been, that we forget what has been the average exchange rate in the year so far. And I wanted to mention this to you, that the average exchange rate for this year, since the 1st of January, the average exchange rate for this year, since the 1st of January, is 160.2. Okay? And if you compare the same average for last year, what was the average exchange rate for the same period last year? It comes to 162. Okay? So 160 today versus 162 last year for the same period. And my point with that was to help us also have an informed discussion on issues related to the exchange rate and to remind that this, in fact, in the long run, like many other modern emerging markets, is going to help ensure that growth in Pakistan, that is going to be accompanied by import growth, is going to remain sustainable. So ladies and gentlemen, the main point of my remarks was to congratulate all of you, because today's ceremony is to recognize some of the leading banks and some of the leading bankers. And I wanted to recap all of the good work, all of the hard work, all of the outstanding work done by all of you in the audience and many others. And I wanted to appreciate the leadership of the banks that is with us today. And to say that in next year's award ceremony, I look forward that we will demonstrate also the concrete progress we have made in some of the areas that I laid out, particularly digitization, particularly inclusion, not just of all Pakistanis, but particularly of underserved areas and underserved segments such as women, such as SMEs, agriculture that I didn't get to mention about, and some of the other areas. Thank you very much.
I request the chief guest to please remain on stage for the presentation of the awards. Thank you very much, Governor, State Bank of Pakistan, Dr. Raza Baqir. It's very heartening to know that we are progressing well, and inshallah the future looks up to us. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed with the part of the evening which we have all been very patiently waiting for, the announcement of the winners for the Pakistan Banking Awards 2021. The Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Raza Baqir, Governor, State Bank of Pakistan, will be presenting the awards. To join him, I would also like to invite Mr. Mansoor Rahman Khan, Chief Executive of the Institute of Bankers Pakistan, on stage to join the Chief Guest in the presentation of the first two awards. Ladies and gentlemen, Our first award for the night is the Best Microfinance Award. This award honors the best microfinance bank in terms of penetration, outreach, efficiency, and access to low-income communities across the country. The participating banks in this category are
is for the Best Microfinance Bank 2021, and the nominations are Mobilink Microfinance Bank Limited, the First Microfinance Bank Limited, You Microfinance Bank Limited, Khushhali Microfinance Bank Limited, and the award goes to?
The award goes to Khushhali Microfinance Bank.
Congratulations, Khushhali Microfinance Bank, for being the best microfinance bank in Pakistan. May I call a representative from Khushhali Microfinance Bank on stage to please receive the award. Congratulations, Khushhali Microfinance Bank. Sir, would you like to say a few words on this occasion?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Julie, for your confidence. Fourth consecutive award to Khushhali Bank. Thank you so much. We are grateful and humbled by this recognition. Thank you.
And now for the second award for this evening, the Best Bank for Small and Medium Businesses. This award is given to the bank with the strongest performance, diversification, and quality of SME lending nationwide. The participating banks for this category are, let's have a look.
The next award is for the Best Bank for Small and Medium Businesses 2021, and the nominations are Habib Bank Limited, Bank Al Falah Limited, JS Bank Limited, Dubai Islamic Bank Limited, the Bank of Punjab, National Bank of Pakistan, and the award goes to?
Yes.
And the award goes to Habib Bank.
Habib Bank Limited is the best bank for small and medium businesses. Congratulations to Habib Bank Limited. May I please call a representative from Habib Bank Limited on stage to receive the award. This is the second award for the evening. Best Bank for Small and Medium Businesses at the Pakistan Banking Awards 2021. Overseas Bank Limited. Would you like to share a few words at this occasion?
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Firstly, we would like to thank all our clients. We'd like to thank the entire HBL team because of whom this has been possible. And lastly, we'd like to thank the Institute of Bankers Pakistan. Thank you everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Masroor Rahman Khan, Chief Executive of IBP. And now I would like to invite Mrs. Naz Arfeen Saigal Lakhani, Deputy Chief Executive of the Dawn Media Group, to join the Governor of the State Bank of Pakistan to present the next two awards. Ladies and gentlemen, the third award for tonight is for the Best Bank for Agriculture. This award is given to the bank with the strongest performance, diversification, and quality of agricultural lending nationwide. The banks participating for this award category are
The next award is for the Best Bank for Agriculture 2021, and the nominations are Habib Bank Limited, Bank Al Falah Limited, the Bank of Punjab, the Punjab Provincial Cooperative Bank Limited, National Bank of Pakistan, and the award goes to
National Bank of Pakistan.
Congratulations, National Bank of Pakistan, for being the best bank for agriculture. May I please request a representative of the bank to come on stage to receive the award.
पैसे जेब में भरे ना इस वजह से
Many congratulations. Sir, would you like to share a few words at this occasion?
जेब में भरा हुआ ना भाई
Thank you, everyone. This is the third time we've got it, but I keep saying every year we haven't done enough, and there's a lot. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the fourth award for tonight is for the Best Digital Banking. It's the Best Digital Banking Award, awarded to the bank serving the retail customer segment most innovatively through digital banking channels, products, and services. The banks participating for this award category are
The next award is for the Best Digital Banking 2021, and the nominations are Habib Bank Limited, United Bank Limited, Allied Bank Limited, Bank Al Falah Limited, Mizan Bank Limited, JS Bank Limited, Dubai Islamic Bank Limited, Telenor Microfinance Bank Limited, Mobile Microfinance Bank Limited, and the award goes to
Award goes to United Bank Limited.
Congratulations, United Bank Limited, for winning the Best Digital Banking Award